I'm Scarlett, 22, and I thought my parents were just being protective when they handled my mail. But when Grandma Rose casually asked if I enjoyed spending my $18,000 graduation gift, my world shattered. The $200 they'd given me suddenly felt like pocket change compared to the massive betrayal I was about to uncover. What I discovered next didn't just destroy my trust in my parents, it exposed a web of lies that had been suffocating our family for years, and the revenge I planned would leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about. Family loyalty. Before we dive into this wild family drama that's about to unfold, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? And if stories about family betrayal and sweet karma get your blood pumping like mine, hit that like button and subscribe, because this tale of deception is just getting started. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes to light. Growing up in suburban Denver, the Mitchell family looked picture perfect from the outside. My parents, David and Linda, had built what everyone considered the ideal American dream. Dad worked as a regional sales manager for a tech company, while Mom managed a boutique marketing firm from our converted garage office. They drove matching Honda CR-Vs, attended every PTA meeting, and never missed a single one of my volleyball games throughout high school. But perfection, I learned, often comes with a price tag that someone else pays. My relationship with my paternal grandmother, Rose Mitchell, had always been the bright spot in my childhood. While my parents were busy climbing the social ladder of our gated community, Grandma Rose was the one who taught me to bake her famous snickerdoodles, helped me with algebra homework over video calls, and sent handwritten letters filled with $20 bills for every minor achievement. She lived in a modest apartment in Phoenix, surviving on Social Security and a small pension from her 40 years as a school librarian. Despite her limited income, Grandma Rose never missed a birthday, holiday, or milestone. When I made varsity volleyball as a sophomore, she sent $50 with a note saying, "For new knee pads, sweetheart." When I got my driver's license, another 50 arrived with, "For your first tank of gas." Her generosity wasn't flashy, but it was consistent and heartfelt. My parents always seemed irritated by her gifts. "She can't afford this," Mom would mutter, tucking the cash into my college fund without asking. "We should tell her to stop." But they never did, and I never questioned why they handled all communication with Grandma Rose. They claimed it was easier to coordinate visits and calls through them, since they managed the family calendar. During my senior year of high school, college applications consumed our household. My parents had their hearts set on prestigious universities, Stanford, Northwestern, Duke schools that matched their image of success. I'd worked hard maintaining a 3.8 gigapascals while playing varsity volleyball and volunteering at the local animal shelter. My parents hired expensive tutors for the SAT, spent thousands on application consultants, and even took me on college tours that cost more than some people's monthly rent. But underneath their supportive exterior, I sensed a growing tension. Phone calls were taken in private. Mail was sorted before I saw it. When I asked about calling Grandma Rose directly, they always had excuses. "She's at her book club," or "the doctor said she needs more rest." I started feeling like I was living in a carefully curated bubble, but I trusted my parents completely. They were my advocates, my champions, my safety net. The acceptance letters started arriving in March. Northwestern said yes. So did Colorado State and University of Denver. But the dream school, Stanford, remained silent. My parents seemed more disappointed than I was when the rejection finally came. "They don't deserve you," Dad said, though his jaw was clenched with obvious frustration. "Northwestern is just as good." We settled on Northwestern, and suddenly the financial reality hit. Even with my partial academic scholarship, we were looking at over $50,000 per year. My parents assured me they had it handled. "Don't worry about money," Mom said. "Focus on your studies. We've been saving for this your entire life." I believed them because I had no reason not to. Graduation day arrived, with all the pomp and circumstance my parents had orchestrated. They threw a party at our house, complete with a catered dinner and a slideshow of my achievements. Neighbors and family friends filled our backyard congratulating me on Northwestern, while my parents beamed with pride. Everything felt perfect, exactly like the life they'd carefully constructed. But Grandma Rose wasn't there. "She's not feeling well," Mom explained when I asked. The flight would be too much for her right now. I was disappointed but understanding. At 81, Grandma Rose had been dealing with arthritis and high blood pressure. I made a mental note to call her the next day to share all the details. That evening, after the guests had left and the dishes were cleaned, my parents presented me with a small wrapped box. Inside was a card from Grandma Rose and 2 crisp $100 bills. "She wanted you to have something special for your achievement," Dad said. "She knows money's tight for her, but she insisted." The card was brief but sweet. "Congratulations on your graduation, Scarlett. I'm so proud of you. Love, Grandma Rose." I was touched by her generosity, even if $200 seemed modest compared to the lavish party my parents had just thrown. But it was the thought that counted, and knowing Grandma Rose had sacrificed to send even this amount made it precious. I tucked the money into my wallet and the card into my memory box, where I kept all her letters. What I didn't know was that this simple moment, accepting what I thought was my grandmother's gift, was actually the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't even realized existed. The carefully constructed world my parents had built was about to crumble, and the truth would prove more devastating than any college rejection letter. Northwestern University welcomed me with open arms that fall, and I threw myself into college life with the enthusiasm my parents had always encouraged. I joined the pre-law program, made friends in my dorm, and even tried out for the club volleyball team. Every week I called home to share updates about my classes, professors, and new experiences. My parents seemed genuinely excited about my progress, always asking detailed questions about my coursework and social life. But something felt off about our conversations regarding Grandma Rose. Whenever I mentioned wanting to call her directly to share my college stories, my parents deflected. "She's been having some rough days," Mom would say. "The doctor thinks it's best if she limits her phone time." When I suggested writing letters like we used to, Dad would chime in. "Her eyesight isn't what it used to be. We read them to her, so just tell us what you want to say." Their explanations made sense individually, but collectively they started forming a pattern that made me uncomfortable. I began paying closer attention to these conversations, and what I noticed made my stomach churn. They were always vague about Grandma Rose's specific health issues. They never mentioned doctor visits, medication changes, or any concrete details about her condition. It was as if they were describing a generic elderly person rather than the sharp, witty woman who had helped me with calculus just 2 years earlier. During my fall semester, I decided to test my growing suspicions. I asked my parents to give Grandma Rose a specific message about a book I was reading for my literature class, one I knew she'd have strong opinions about since she'd been a librarian. When I called home a week later and asked for her response, my parents exchanged glances I could hear even over the phone. "She said it sounded interesting," Mom replied after a pause. That wasn't Grandma Rose. The woman who had spent 40 years recommending books to students would never give such a bland response to The Handmaid's Tale. She would have launched into a detailed analysis of dystopian literature and its relevance to modern society. She would have recommended 3 other books I should read next. She would have shared a story about some student who had discovered Margaret Atwood through her guidance. My suspicions crystallized into real concern, but I pushed them aside as I prepared for winter break. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe Grandma Rose really was having health issues that affected her mental sharpness. Maybe I was being paranoid because college had made me more independent and critical of my parents' protectiveness. But when I came home for Christmas, the pieces started falling into place in ways I couldn't ignore. The house looked different, not physically but energetically. My parents seemed nervous around me, like they were walking on eggshells. They hovered when I went through my old mail, explaining that they'd organized everything while I was away. They suggested activities that kept us busy and out of the house: shopping, movies, dinners with family friends. It felt like they were running interference, though I couldn't figure out what they were protecting me from. The breaking point came on December 28th. I was in my childhood bedroom packing for my return to Northwestern when I found an old address book in my desk drawer. Grandma Rose's contact information was written in my own handwriting from years ago, back when I used to send her birthday cards independently. On impulse, I grabbed my cell phone and dialed her number. My heart pounded as the phone rang. What if she really was too sick to talk? What if my parents were right to limit contact? What if hello? The voice was clear, strong, and unmistakably Grandma Rose. Grandma, it's Scarlett. Scarlett. Oh my goodness, sweetheart, what a wonderful surprise. I haven't heard from you in months. How is college treating you? Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by confusion. She sounded perfectly fine, not sick, not confused, not limited in any way. We talked for 20 minutes about Northwestern, my classes, my new friends, and her latest book club selection. She was sharp, engaged, and exactly the grandmother I remembered. But as our conversation continued, a chill ran down my spine. I hope you've been enjoying your graduation gift, she said, near the end of our call. $18,000 is quite a chunk of change for a college student. I know it's not enough to cover everything, but I wanted to make sure you had a good start. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. $18,000. Yes, dear. I sent it right after your graduation party. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I wanted to make sure you got it in time for your first semester expenses. My mouth went dry. The $200, the card, the explanation about Grandma Rose's limited finances. Everything I'd been told was a lie. Grandma, I managed to say I only received $200. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, in a voice I'd never heard from her before, sharp with anger and disbelief, she said, "What did you just say?" I repeated myself, my voice shaking. Grandma Rose was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her librarian instincts had kicked in. She wanted facts, dates, details. She told me exactly when she'd sent the money, a cashier's check made out to me personally sent via certified mail to ensure it arrived safely. She had the tracking number, the receipt, everything. "Your father signed for it," she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "I have the confirmation right here." As the truth crashed over me, I heard my parents' voices downstairs calling that dinner was ready. My family, the people I trusted most in the world, had stolen from me. They'd stolen from Grandma Rose. They'd been lying to both of us for months, maybe longer. "Grandma," I whispered, "I think we need to talk more about this. But not now." "Can I call you tomorrow?" "Yes," she said firmly. "And Scarlett, don't mention this conversation to your parents yet. Something very wrong is happening here, and we need to figure out exactly what before we confront them." I hung up the phone with shaking hands, staring at the $200 that were still in my wallet from graduation. Money that I now realized was likely my parents' attempt to cover their tracks a fraction of what Grandma Rose had actually sent, designed to maintain the illusion that she'd contributed something to my education. Downstairs, my parents were setting the table for dinner, acting like the loving, supportive family they'd always appeared to be. But now I saw them differently. Now I saw them as thieves who had been playing both their daughter and their mother for fools. The question wasn't just what else they'd lied about, it was how long this had been going on and how I was going to make them pay. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, my mind racing with the implications of Grandma Rose's revelation. $18,000 gone, stolen by the two people I trusted most in the world. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of my childhood room, I realized this betrayal went far deeper than just money. It was about manipulation, control, and the systematic isolation of Grandma Rose from my life. I called her at 8 a.m. sharp, knowing she'd be awake and probably as eager to talk as I was. When she answered, her voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying anger that had been building overnight. "I've been thinking about our conversation," she said without preamble, "and I've been going through my records. Scarlett, this isn't the first time money I've sent you has gone missing." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean? Your sweet 16th birthday. I sent $500. Your parents told me you used it for a class ring, but when we video called on your actual birthday, you weren't wearing one. When I asked about it, they said you'd decided to wait until senior year." Her voice grew sharper. "Your high school graduation wasn't the first lie, sweetheart. I think it's been going on for years." As she spoke, memories started reshaping themselves in my mind. The times I'd expected gifts from Grandma Rose that never arrived. The occasions when my parents mentioned her generosity, but I never saw evidence of it. The gradual reduction in direct contact between us, always with reasonable explanations that I'd never thought to question. "There's more," Grandma Rose continued. "I've been sending your parents $300 every month for the past 2 years to help with your college expenses. I told them not to tell you because I didn't want you to feel guilty about my spending. They assured me it was going directly into your college fund, $300 a month for 2 years. That was over $7,000 on top of the $18,000 graduation gift, and who knows what else over the years. My parents hadn't just stolen from me, they'd been systematically draining my elderly grandmother's limited resources while making both of us believe we were protecting each other. The rage that built in my chest was unlike anything I'd ever felt. But alongside the anger was something else: determination. My parents had underestimated both Grandma Rose and me. They thought we were easy marks, too trusting and too disconnected to compare notes. They were about to learn otherwise. "Grandma," I said, "I need you to gather every record you have. Bank statements, receipts, tracking numbers, everything. I'm going to find out exactly how much they've taken, and then we're going to get it back. What do you have in mind? I'm not sure yet. But they've been playing a long game, so we need to play one too. Can you give me a few days to do some investigating on my end?" After we hung up, I started my own detective work. I knew my parents' routines intimately after 18 years. Dad left for work at 7:30 a.m. and rarely returned before 6 p.m. Mom's schedule was more flexible, but she had client meetings most mornings and a standing yoga class on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The next day, while they were both out, I went into their home office. My heart pounded as I searched through their filing cabinets, looking for anything related to my education expenses or correspondence with Grandma Rose. What I found made me sick. In a folder labeled Scarlet College, I discovered bank statements showing deposits that matched the amounts and dates Grandma Rose had described. The $18,000 graduation gift was there, deposited into their joint account 3 days after my graduation party. The monthly $300 payments were all accounted for, going back exactly 2 years. But that wasn't the worst part. In the same folder was a letter I'd never seen written in Grandma Rose's careful handwriting and dated 6 months ago. It was addressed to me, but the envelope had been opened and read. In it, she expressed concern about not hearing from me directly and asked if I was upset with her about something. She mentioned several gifts she'd sent that I'd never acknowledged, including a care package for my birthday and money for textbooks. My parents had been intercepting our mail. Not just incoming packages, but letters. They'd been controlling every aspect of our relationship, making both of us think the other didn't care as much as we actually did. The more I dug, the worse it got. I found records of Christmas gifts that had been lost in the mail, birthday cards I'd never received, and even evidence that they'd been telling Grandma Rose that I was too busy with college to call her back when she tried to reach me. They'd created a web of lies so complex and sustained that it must have required constant maintenance. Every conversation with either of us had to be carefully managed to maintain the illusion. Every story had to be coordinated to prevent the truth from coming out. As I photographed the evidence with my phone, sending copies to a secure email account they didn't know about, I realized something important. My parents weren't just thieves. They were sophisticated manipulators who had been gaslighting both Grandma Rose and me for years. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a financial emergency that had gotten out of hand. This was calculated, systematic, emotional, and financial abuse. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that Grandma Rose and I would never talk to each other directly without their involvement. They'd counted on our trust in them to keep us isolated from each other. And now that trust was broken, their entire house of cards was about to collapse. That evening at dinner, I watched my parents with new eyes. Dad talked about work stress and quarterly reports. Mom mentioned a difficult client and her plans to redecorate the kitchen. They asked about my spring semester classes and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. To anyone watching, we looked like a normal, loving family. But I could see the performance now. The careful way they redirected conversation when I mentioned calling Grandma Rose. The slight tension when I asked about family finances. The way they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking. "I was thinking about calling Grandma Rose tonight," I said, casually cutting into my chicken. "I haven't talked to her in a while." "Oh, you know what Mom said quickly? She mentioned to me yesterday that she's been having some dizzy spells. The doctor wants her to limit phone time in the evenings." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that I almost admired the skill involved. Almost. "That's too bad," I said. "Maybe I'll send her a card instead." "That's sweet, honey," Dad said. "We can mail it with our next letter to her." More control. More manipulation. They couldn't risk me communicating with her independently, because their entire scheme depended on managing information flow. I excused myself after dinner, claiming I had reading to catch up on before returning to Northwestern. But instead of studying, I was planning. My parents thought they were so clever, but they'd made the classic mistake of underestimating their victims. Grandma Rose had spent 40 years as a librarian, which meant she was skilled at research, documentation, and organizing information. I was a pre-law student with access to legal resources and a growing understanding of how evidence worked. Together, we were going to destroy them. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of their betrayal. Tomorrow I would visit the bank where they'd deposited Grandma Rose's money. I would request transaction records. I would build an airtight case. And then when I had everything I needed, I would give my parents a choice: make full restitution voluntarily or face the consequences of their theft in a much more public forum. The game was changing, and they didn't even know it yet. The next morning, I told my parents I was meeting some high school friends for coffee, which gave me several hours to execute my plan. First, stop the bank where my parents had deposited Grandma Rose's money. I'd found the account numbers in their files, and as their daughter, I hoped I could get some information about the recent large deposits. The bank manager, Mrs. Chen, had known our family for years. When I explained that I was trying to understand some recent transactions for college planning purposes, she was initially helpful. But when I asked specifically about the $18,000 deposit, her demeanor changed. "That's quite a large amount," she said carefully. "Can you tell me why you're asking about this specific transaction?" I made a decision to be partially honest. My grandmother sent me money for college, but there seems to be some confusion about the amount. I'm trying to reconcile the records. Mrs. Chen pulled up the account on her computer, and I watched her expression grow concerned as she read whatever was on the screen. "Scarlett, this deposit was made from a cashier's check made out to you personally, but it was deposited into your parents' account, not yours." "What does that mean exactly?" "Legally speaking, when someone writes a check to you, you're the only person who can legally endorse and deposit it. If someone else deposited it without your signature, that could constitute forgery and theft." My hands started shaking. "Can you print out a record of this transaction? I can give you a receipt showing the deposit was made, but for anything more detailed, you'd need either your parents' permission, since it's their account, or potentially a court order." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Scarlett, if you believe someone has deposited money meant for you without your permission, you should consider speaking with the police or a lawyer." I thanked her and left with a basic transaction receipt, my mind reeling. What my parents had done wasn't just morally wrong, it was actual criminal theft. They'd forged my signature on a check worth $18,000. My next stop was Northwestern's financial aid office, which I called from my car in the bank parking lot. I explained that I'd recently discovered additional funds that might be available for my education, and asked about the process for making payments against my student loans. "Any payment would be wonderful," the counselor said. "You currently have about $47,000 in loans for this academic year. Any amount your family can contribute would reduce the interest you'll be paying over time. $47,000. Money I was borrowing with interest, while my parents sat on money that was meant to help with exactly these expenses. They weren't just stealing from Grandma Rose and me, they were allowing me to go into debt that could have been avoided." Back home, I found Mom in her office working on her laptop. I sat down across from her desk, trying to look casual. "Mom, I've been thinking about my student loans," I said. "They're pretty substantial. Do you think there's any way we could make some additional payments to reduce the interest?" She looked up from her screen, and for just a moment I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt. Fear. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Oh, honey, we're doing everything we can. Dad and I are stretched pretty thin with the mortgage and your tuition. Every extra penny is going toward your education." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I realized she'd probably told it many times before to herself, to Dad, maybe even to Grandma Rose when explaining why they needed her monthly contributions. "Have you gotten any updates from Grandma Rose about her health?" I asked, changing tactics. "She's hanging in there. The doctor says she needs to take things easy, so we're trying not to burden her with too much communication." Another lie delivered with the same concerned tone she'd use if Grandma Rose were actually sick. That evening I called Grandma Rose again, this time with a much more detailed plan. "I went to the bank today," I told her. "They confirmed that the check was deposited into my parents' account. The bank manager said it might be criminal theft." Grandma Rose was quiet for a moment. "Scarlett, I've been thinking about this situation, and I believe we need to be very careful about how we proceed. Your parents are my son and daughter-in-law. This will destroy our family if we handle it wrong. Grandma, they've been stealing from you for years. They've been lying to both of us, isolating us from each other, and letting me go into debt while sitting on money that was meant to help me. How is there a right way to handle that?" "I'm not saying we shouldn't confront them. I'm saying we should give them a chance to make this right before we involve outside authorities." Family is complicated, sweetheart. I understood her position, but I also realized something she might not have considered. "Grandma, what if we're not the only ones they've done this to? What if there are other family members or friends they've manipulated the same way?" That possibility seemed to shake her. "You think this could be bigger than just us? I think people who are this good at lying and manipulating don't develop those skills overnight. I think we should document everything we can find before we confront them, so we know exactly what we're dealing with." Over the next 2 days, Grandma Rose and I worked together like detectives. She went through her records with the thoroughness of a trained librarian, documenting every gift, every deposit, every communication she'd had with my parents over the past 5 years. I used my access to the house to photograph every relevant document I could find. The picture that emerged was staggering. Over the past 5 years, Grandma Rose had sent over $30,000 intended for me. Birthday gifts, Christmas presents, graduation, money monthly, college contributions, all of it had been intercepted and kept by my parents. They'd used some of it to maintain their lifestyle and some to make minimum payments on my student loans, always keeping me in debt while appearing to be sacrificing for my education. But the financial theft was only part of the story. The emotional manipulation was equally devastating. They'd been systematically isolating Grandma Rose and me from each other, making both of us feel like the other person didn't care as much as we actually did. They'd stolen our relationship along with our money. On January 2nd, the day before I was supposed to return to Northwestern, I made my decision. "Grandma," I said during our evening call, "I want to confront them tomorrow, together. I want you to drive up here, and I want us to sit them down and demand answers." "Are you sure you're ready for this?" "I'm sure, but I want to record the conversation and I want to have all our evidence organized. If they don't agree to make full restitution immediately, I'm going to the police. And if they do agree, then they have to pay back every penny with interest, and they have to restore the relationship between us that they damaged. No more controlling our communication, no more lies. And they have to understand that if this ever happens again, we won't be giving them a second chance." Grandma Rose was quiet for a long moment. "You've grown up to be a strong woman, Scarlett. Stronger than I was at your age. Okay, I'll drive up tomorrow morning, but you should know after tomorrow nothing will ever be the same between you and your parents." "Good," I said, "because what we had before was based on lies. I'd rather have a difficult truth than a comfortable deception." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete clarity about what I needed to do. My parents had taught me to be strong, independent, and principled. They just hadn't expected me to use those qualities against them. Tomorrow the reckoning would begin. Grandma Rose arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, looking every inch the determined librarian who had spent decades dealing with difficult situations. She carried a leather portfolio, filled with meticulously organized documents, bank records, receipts, correspondence, and a detailed timeline of every theft. I had printed out all the photos I'd taken of my parents' files, along with the bank receipt confirming the deposit of her check into their account. We spent an hour reviewing our evidence and planning our approach. Grandma Rose wanted to give my parents every opportunity to explain themselves before we moved to consequences. I was less generous, but I respected her wishes. After all, they were her son and daughter-in-law, and this betrayal cut even deeper for her than it did for me. "Remember," she said as we heard my dad's car pulling into the driveway at noon, "we document everything they say. If they lie to us even once during this conversation, we're done trying to handle this as a family matter." My parents walked into the living room expecting to find me alone packing for my return to Northwestern. Instead, they found Grandma Rose sitting calmly on the couch, her portfolio open on the coffee table, while I stood near the window with my phone obviously recording. The change in their expressions was instant and telling. Dad's face went pale while Mom's eyes immediately darted to the documents spread across the table. They knew in that moment that their game was over. "Mom," Dad said, his voice carefully controlled. "What a nice surprise. We didn't know you were coming." "Sit down, David," Grandma Rose said quietly. "Both of you. We need to talk." They sat on the opposite couch, and I could see them trying to process what was happening. Mom reached for Dad's hand, a gesture that might have looked supportive if I hadn't known they were both calculating their next move. "I'm going to make this very simple," Grandma Rose continued. 18 months ago, I sent Scarlett $18,000 for her graduation. Last month, I discovered she never received it. Yesterday, we confirmed that you deposited that check into your personal account without her knowledge or permission. Dead silence. They didn't deny it, which was smart since we had proof. But they also didn't admit it, which told me they were still trying to find an angle to work. "But that's not all, is it?" I said, stepping forward. "Grandma Rose has been sending me gifts and money for years that I never received. She's been sending you $300 a month for my college expenses, money that was supposed to go directly into my education fund. And you've been intercepting our mail and controlling our communication to keep us from comparing notes." Dad finally found his voice. "Scarlett, you don't understand the full situation." "Then explain it," Grandma Rose interrupted sharply. "Explain how you justified stealing from your own mother and lying to your own daughter. Explain how you've been forging Scarlett's signature on checks made out to her personally. Explain how you've been letting her take on student loan debt while sitting on money that was meant to help her avoid exactly that debt." The room was silent except for the sound of my phone recording everything. My parents looked at each other, and I could see them having an entire conversation without words. Finally, Mom spoke. "We were going to pay it back," she said quietly. "We had some unexpected expenses, and we were going to replace the money before anyone noticed." "What unexpected expenses?" I demanded. "The kitchen renovation, the new cars, the vacation to Europe last summer. The business loan came due early," Dad said. "Linda's company hit a rough patch, and we had to choose between losing everything we'd built or borrowing against your future. We always intended to pay it back with interest." For 5 years, Grandma Rose's voice was ice cold. "You've been borrowing from Scarlett for 5 years. The lies were unraveling now, and they knew it." Mom started crying, whether from genuine remorse or calculated manipulation, I couldn't tell anymore. "We never wanted to hurt anyone," she sobbed. "We just got in over our heads, and it seemed like the money was just sitting there, not being used." Not being used! I was furious now. "It was meant for my education. I have $47,000 in student loans because you stole the money that was supposed to help me avoid debt. We've been making payments on your loans, Dad protested. Minimum payments with my own money, I shot back. You've been managing my debt with money that was stolen from me. Grandma Rose stood up, her dignity intact despite the emotional chaos around her. I want a full accounting of every penny you've taken, and I want it repaid immediately. Not over time, not with promises immediately. Mom, we don't have $30,000 lying around, Dad said desperately. Then you'll get a loan, or you'll sell assets, or you'll figure it out the same way any other thief would have to when they're caught, she replied. But that's just the money. What about the relationship you stole between Scarlett and me? What about the years of lies and manipulation? What about the trust you've destroyed? It was clear that my parents had no real answers. They'd been caught, and all their careful planning and manipulation couldn't save them now. But what happened next shocked even me. Fine, Mom said, wiping her eyes and suddenly looking more angry than sorry. You want the truth. The truth is that you've been enabling this family's financial problems for years, Rose. Every time we needed help, you were right there with your guilt money, trying to buy your way into being the favorite grandmother. And Scarlett, you've been walking around acting like you're entitled to handouts while we're working ourselves to death to give you opportunities we never had. The mask had finally come off. This wasn't remorse, it was resentment. They were angry at being caught, not sorry for what they'd done. Are you actually blaming me for trusting you? I asked incredulously. We're saying that maybe you should have been paying more attention to what it actually costs to maintain the life you've been living, Dad said. Do you have any idea what we've sacrificed so you could go to Northwestern? Sacrificed with stolen money, Grandma Rose snapped. Money that wasn't yours to sacrifice? The argument that followed was brutal and final. Every pretense of family harmony evaporated as the truth came out. They felt entitled to Grandma Rose's money because they were managing my life and education. They felt justified in lying to both of us because they believed they knew what was best. They saw themselves as martyrs rather than thieves. When it became clear that they had no intention of taking real responsibility, Grandma Rose packed up her documents. You have 48 hours to provide a full financial accounting and a plan for immediate repayment, she said. If I don't have both by Thursday, I'm filing a police report for theft and fraud. And Scarlett, pack your things. You're coming to stay with me until we get this sorted out. As we walked toward the door, Dad made one last desperate attempt. You're really going to destroy this family over money? I turned back to look at him. You already destroyed this family when you decided that stealing and lying was easier than asking for help. We're just refusing to pretend otherwise anymore. The drive to Phoenix with Grandma Rose was quiet but not uncomfortable. We were both processing the fact that people we'd loved and trusted had been systematically betraying us for years. But we were also both relieved that the truth was finally out in the open. What happens now? I asked as we crossed into Arizona. Now we see what kind of people your parents really are, she said. If they meet our demands, maybe we can rebuild something honest with them eventually. If they don't, then we've learned everything we need to know about who they really are. I spent the night in Grandma Rose's spare bedroom, surrounded by the books and quilts that had made her apartment feel like home during my childhood visits. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The truth was painful, but it was also liberating. Tomorrow we would find out whether my parents were willing to face the consequences of their choices or whether they would force us to seek justice through other means. Thursday came and went without a word from my parents. No phone calls, no emails, no plan for repayment. Their silence spoke louder than any explanation could have. They'd made their choice. and now Grandma Rose and I would make ours. Friday morning, we walked into the Phoenix Police Department together. Detective Maria Santos listened carefully as we presented our evidence: the bank records, the forged signatures, the pattern of theft over multiple years. She was particularly interested in the $18,000 graduation check. "This is textbook identity theft and fraud," she said, reviewing the documents. "The fact that it's family members doesn't change the legal implications. Are you prepared to pursue charges?" "We gave them the opportunity to make this right," Grandma Rose said firmly. "They chose to ignore us." "Yes, we want to pursue charges." The wheels of justice moved faster than I expected. Within a week, my parents were arrested on charges of theft, fraud, and identity theft. The local news picked up the story: local couple accused of stealing graduation gift from daughter, and suddenly our private family drama became public knowledge. But something unexpected happened with that publicity. Other people started coming forward. Mrs. Patterson from down the street called to say my parents had asked to borrow money for my college expenses 2 years ago and never paid it back. A cousin I barely knew reached out to say they'd never received thank you notes for graduation gifts. They'd sent me gifts I'd never seen. Most shocking of all, my dad's brother called to say my parents had been collecting money from extended family members for years, claiming it was for my college fund. The investigation revealed that our situation wasn't unique. It was part of a much larger pattern of financial manipulation that had been going on for nearly a decade. My parents had been using my education and Grandma Rose's generosity as a cover for what amounted to a small-scale Ponzi scheme within our own family. The legal proceedings took months, during which I stayed with Grandma Rose and attended Northwestern remotely when possible. It was a difficult time, but it was also healing. For the first time in my life, I got to have an unfiltered relationship with my grandmother. We cooked together, read together, and talked about everything my parents had prevented us from sharing over the years. "I keep thinking about all the conversations we never had," I told her one evening as we worked on a jigsaw puzzle together. "All the advice you could have given me, all the stories I missed." "We have time for those conversations now," she said gently. "And you know what? I think you turned out just fine without them. You were strong enough to stand up for what was right even when it meant going against your own parents. That's not something anyone could have taught you, that came from inside you." The criminal case ended with my parents pleading guilty to avoid trial. They were sentenced to community service probation and ordered to pay full restitution, not just to Grandma Rose and me, but to all the family members they'd defrauded. The judge was particularly harsh about the systematic nature of their deception. "This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment," she said during sentencing. "This was a sustained campaign of manipulation and theft that victimized some of the people who trusted you most. The fact that the victims were your own family members makes this more serious, not less." With the stolen money recovered and my student loans paid off, I was able to focus on my studies without the crushing debt I'd been carrying. But more importantly, I was able to build genuine relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. Grandma Rose and I started a tradition of weekly video calls, where we discussed everything from my coursework to her book club selections to our thoughts on current events. She became not just my grandmother, but one of my closest friends and advisors. When I graduated from Northwestern with honors 2 years later, she was in the front row beaming with pride. My parents tried to reach out several times during the legal proceedings, and afterward, they sent letters apologizing and asking for forgiveness. They claimed they'd learned their lesson and wanted to rebuild our relationship. But their words felt hollow after years of practiced deception. How could I trust anything they said when they'd proven themselves to be such skilled liars? I eventually agreed to meet with them for coffee about a year after the sentencing. They looked older, more worn down. Dad had lost his job when his employer learned about the criminal charges. Mom's business had collapsed when clients discovered her legal troubles. They were living in a small apartment, having been forced to sell the house to pay restitution. "We know we have no right to ask for forgiveness," Mom said carefully. "But we want you to know that we're getting counseling both individually and together. We're trying to understand how we got so far off track. The counselor says we created a pattern of justifying increasingly bad decisions," Dad added. "Each lie made the next one easier until we weren't even seeing clearly anymore." I listened to their explanations and apologies, but I felt disconnected from them. These weren't the parents I'd grown up loving and trusting. Those people had been performances carefully constructed to hide who they really were underneath. "I appreciate that you're working on yourselves," I told them, "but I need you to understand that the people who raised me don't exist anymore. You revealed your true selves when you got caught, and those are the people I have to decide whether I want in my life." It's been 3 years since that confrontation in my childhood living room. I'm in my final year of law school now, specializing in elder abuse and financial fraud. Grandma Rose jokes that our family drama inspired my career choice, and she's not wrong. I've learned that what happened to us happens to families across the country every day. Trusted family members taking advantage of elderly relatives and young adults who assume their loved ones have their best interests at heart. Grandma Rose is 84 now, still sharp as ever, still beating everyone at her weekly bridge game. She moved to a retirement community near my law school, so we can see each other regularly. She says having me in her life has given her more joy than all the money my parents stole ever could have. My parents and I exchange holiday cards now, nothing more. They're still together, still in counseling, still claiming they've changed. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. But the relationship we had before was built on lies, and I've learned to value truth too much to try to rebuild something false. The most important lesson I learned from this whole experience wasn't about money or even trust, it was about agency. For years, my parents controlled the narrative of my life, deciding what information I received and how I interpreted it. They made me a character in their story rather than the author of my own. Once I took that power back, everything changed. Sometimes people ask me if I regret exposing my parents, if I wish I'd found a way to handle it privately. The answer is always no. They stole more than money. They stole years of authentic relationship with Grandma Rose. They stole my financial independence, and they stole my ability to make informed decisions about my own life. The only way to get any of that back was to refuse to protect them from the consequences of their choices. Now, as I'm about to graduate law school and start my career helping other families navigate similar betrayals, I think about how different my life might have been if I'd never made that phone call to Grandma Rose. I would have finished college drowning in debt while my parents lived comfortably on stolen money. I would have spent years feeling guilty that my elderly grandmother couldn't afford to be more generous, never knowing she'd been sending thousands of dollars that I never received. I would have continued to have a relationship with my parents that was built entirely on lies. Instead, I have a relationship with my grandmother that's built on complete honesty, respect, and genuine affection. I have a career path that matters to me. I have the knowledge that when faced with a choice between comfortable lies and difficult truths, I chose truth. And I have the satisfaction of knowing that my parents learned a lesson they'll never forget. Family loyalty isn't a one-way street, and love isn't an excuse for theft. Has anyone in your family ever betrayed your trust in a way that completely changed how you saw them? How did you handle discovering that someone you loved had been lying to you for years? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Love to hear your stories and advice. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life drama and family justice stories. Sometimes, the most important lessons come from the most painful experiences, and sharing these stories helps all of us recognize when we might be in similar situations. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, trust your instincts, verify important information independently, and never be afraid to ask difficult questions when something doesn't feel right. Family should be built on love and honesty, not manipulation and control. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Until next time, stay strong and stay honest with the people you love. They deserve nothing less than the truth, and so do you.